Working cab doors were a modification I wanted to make to this Transtar 4300 model, so the first challenge became how to replicate this style of hinge, often referred to as either a piano hinge or a continuous hinge, in 1/25th scale. These hinges are quite simple in design, consisting of a continuous hinge pin with flat plates that bolt onto the cab and the door itself. The difficult part of building them in model form lies with strength of materials and being able to attach them securely to the finished model. A number of years ago I made door hinges for a Kenworth cabover. These were constructed by cutting short lengths from 1/32 inch diameter brass tube and soldering them to a piece of strip cut from thin shim brass. These hinges did work, but they were quite tedious to construct, and a small glue joint between dissimilar materials like brass and plastic is something I prefer not to rely on for secure attachment, especially on a part that's going to see handling like an operating door. The approach I came up with for the Transtar 4300 involves gluing the hinge pieces to the inside of the cab where they'll be hidden from view, and there's a lot more gluing surface available. Cutting the doors free from the cab shell is the first step, and this is made straightforward by a well-defined groove that's molded around the outline of the door. Here it's highlighted in red, and here you can see how the back of a number 11 hobby knife blade is used to make multiple light passes along the groove to cut through the cab shell. Cut all the way through along the front edge of the door where the hinge will be constructed, and finish the cuts on the round corners, but leave material attaching the door to the cab shell along the top, bottom, and back. Doing this keeps the door aligned properly during construction of the hinge, and it's something I learned from a good video on the Model Car Muse channel, which I'll provide a link to in the description. A simple tool for cutting the brass strips was made by gluing a piece of 3/16 square styrene strip to a piece of 60 thou styrene sheet. This provides a surface against which the edge of the brass shim is placed. I used brass shim from K&S Metals that was 3/1000ths of an inch thick, or in metric, 0.07 millimeter. Place a spacer of 60/1000ths of an inch square styrene strip against the back stop and lay a straight edge against the spacer. Remove the spacer and cut the strip free from the sheet by making multiple light passes with a sharp number 11 hobby knife blade. Each hinge section is made from a piece of strip cut 3/4 of an inch long with an initial rough bend formed around a piece of 0.025 inch wire. Using flat nose pliers, complete the hinge section by forming the bend tightly around the wire. Here are the hinge sections at various stages of assembly. A total of 16 will be required per door. Starting at the bottom of the door, just above the rounded corner, insert the 16 hinge sections into place, as shown here. A piece of wire is inserted through all the hinge sections to serve as an alignment tool. The L-shaped bend at the top of the wire is for taping the wire down to keep it in place, while each of the hinge sections are worked on individually. At this stage, all of the hinge sections are in place, but haven't been attached to the cab or the door. The first section to attach will be the bottom one, and this will be secured to the cab. It's easy to bend the thin brass strip down flat against the inside of the cab shell. Secure the brass strip with CA glue, held in place with self-closing tweezers, until it cures fully. Alternate between attaching to the cab and the door with each hinge section, working from the bottom towards the top. The topmost hinge section had to be cut shorter because of the shape of the cowl. All hinge sections glued in place and temporary hinge pin removed. On the passenger side, the vent and the clear vision window required cutting a number of the hinge sections shorter, but the same procedure was followed, alternating between cab and door, working from bottom to top. Because the cut is wider than the thickness of the hinge sections, with the hinge pin removed at this stage, the hinges look misaligned. This will be addressed later during final installation. Finish cutting the door free from the cab shell and sand any rough edges smooth. Styrene sheet is glued to the inside of the door to strengthen the hinge assembly and provide a smooth surface for attaching the interior trim panel later. I use 15/1000 of an inch styrene sheet, and I also use strips of the same thickness around the window opening on the upper half of the door to provide a recessed area into which the window glass will be glued. Styrene sheet of the same 15/1000 of an inch thickness was cut to fit along the inside of the cab shell and glued in place, again to strengthen the hinge assembly and provide a smooth surface onto which the interior details can be built. 15 hinge sections were used on the cab and door. The 16th one is soldered to a piece of 20/1000 of an inch brass wire to be used as the hinge pin. Cut off excess material and file smooth, and insert the hinge pin from the top. The section soldered to the end of the wire matches the appearance of all the other hinge sections and acts as a stop to keep the hinge pin in place. A number 72 twist drill can be used to clean out the hinge sections if any glue is seeped in during assembly and is interfering with the fit of the hinge pin. Also on the subject of fit, in this example, the door fits reasonably well in the opening with the exception of a large gap on the angled portion above the hinge. To reduce the size of this gap, a styrene strip 15/1000 of an inch thick and slightly wider than the door was glued in place along the leading edge of the door and allowed to cure thoroughly. It was then wrapped around the top of the door, glued, and secured with 2 pairs of self-closing tweezers until the glue had dried. Final sanding blends the added styrene strip into the door and reduces the size of the visible gap along the door's leading edge above the hinge. Thank you for watching this approach to building this style of hinge in 1/25th scale. I call this part 1 because with the doors now hinged, it's necessary to build up the door jamb areas of the cab and also add some additional interior detail. I'll treat those as parts 2 and 3 to follow in the near future.